Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where the Star Wars box office debate rages on, and it ain't getting any prettier or simpler. Well, actually, each side thinks it's super simple, and that's what we're going to discuss. So let's break down the two sides of the debate. So on one side, we're going to be super fair here, all right? So on one side, episode 8 has raced past $1 billion. And it did do all these things that I'm going to list, all right? It is by far and away the biggest movie of 2017 domestically, and the 6th biggest domestically of all time. And by the way, it's not done just quite yet. And then also, it is likely to become the biggest movie of 2017 overall, worldwide, not only unseating fellow Disney flick Beauty and the Beast, Friendly Fire, Disney. It has so many riches, it's taken itself out. Not only for the year, but it's also going to take the number 10 slot in the $1 billion club, which Beauty and the Beast previously had. It's tough out there. I like both movies personally, so yay on that side. Now, if you go to the other side, Episode 8 continues to drop at an alarming rate domestically, losing the number 1 position in its 4th weekend, whereas The Force Awakens was number 1 until its 5th weekend. I know that's just a weekend difference, but it's still hundreds of millions of dollars behind The Force Awakens domestically. Now, it's also losing serious business to the Jumanji sequel, a film that should not be a threat to a brand at the level of Star Wars, right? I don't think that Kathleen Kennedy was ever like, ooh, look, Jumanji's opening like the weekend after me, I'm scared. Although now she is. All right, then also, box office rich China is lost to this franchise, unless something huge happens down the line. But The Last Jedi opened this weekend far lower in China than The Force Awakens and even Rogue One did. And that's with the addition of the Tico sisters, showing that it's harder to appeal to Chinese audiences than simply casting an Asian actor or actress in a large role. I hope that Mulan goes better for them. So, yikes! But even with all this new information coming in, the debate remains the same. And I continue to say, eerily similar to the DCEU box office debate that took place over the past year until Justice League ended that debate. So that debate was, because some of you I'm sure are like, stop comparing it to the DCEU, but the comparison fits. Because with the DCEU, the common refrain was, how can a movie be considered a failure if it's making so much damn money, right? Does that sound familiar to you? I think a couple of you have typed, I think people typed that for both movies, but it's funny, I think that you were on opposite sides of the argument for the DCEU and now Star Wars. It's a weird situation. I think that's adding maybe a little bit to the animosity. So, to be fair though, the same conversation has also been had for years with Transformers, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Fast and Furious, until this year. It was a busy year in last year, 2017. But the bottom dropped out of Transformers, just like with the DCEU, and then with Pirates and Fast and Furious, while they're still making a lot of money, they've become so lopsided with domestic versus foreign box office that one has to wonder how long they can exist in that state. Now, with these three franchises, I'm sure you might have noticed that I said conversation instead of debate, because with those franchises, fans didn't really have any skin in the game and were more casual, exhausted observers who were just like, oh man, why is anybody still supporting those movies? But again, when it comes to the DCEU and Star Wars, these franchises have fans who in large part define themselves personally by these brands. So it's like a sports team or a politician. The potential loss is, really a serious problem, not only for the franchise, but for the fans themselves. And that's why they defend both so vigorously. So will the bottom fall out from under? I think it's important, by the way, to understand what's going on here, not only with Star Wars, but with the two sides in terms of why they're making the cases that they are. And if you understand who you're talking to, you can probably have a little bit of a better conversation and a little less heated one maybe, right? All right, so anyway, will the bottom fall out from underneath Star Wars? Well, many are predicting it will happen with this very year with Solo, a much troubled and so far hidden film. Why are they hiding it? That was Ron Howard recently tweeted. He's like, it's coming. And you're like, oh, poor Ron Howard. He's like, leave me alone. I took over somebody else's movie. But anyway, and I'm sure for some reason people are like, for that reason, I shall never leave you alone, Ron Howard. All right, we'll see how I hope he fares better with internet hate than Rian Johnson has. We'll talk about that. But anyway, that film was risky from the start, even before it created its own problems. So even more so, it also has the almost jinxed release date of Memorial Day weekend, where a number of Disney franchises have crashed and burned. So it's kind of weird. We've discussed that on Morning Movie News. One of you said, well, shouldn't May the 4th be the date you release a Star Wars movie and you stick Avengers, Infinity War in Memorial Day weekend? And I think Disney's like, look, we love the synergy of May the 4th for Han Solo, but Avengers is far more valuable to us. Isn't that crazy? But I think Avengers is more valuable because they don't hit the $1 billion club with the consistency that Star Wars has so far, but they're more prolific. And as we discussed in the top 10 movies of 2017 box office wise, all 3 Disney releases, including the one they did with Sony, hit $800 million. That's amazing. And then, of course, there's episode 9 coming up, also troubled at this point, which now has the Herculean task of uniting a divided fan base where fans stand at opposite sides of what they want to see happen in episode 9. Some want to continue this story, some want to see it undone. And will J.J. Abrams actually undo anything that Rian Johnson has put in motion? Rian Johnson even said, as I said, he's crumbling. He was like, you could undo this. I'm not married to it. I'm leaving. And one also has to wonder, speaking of Johnson, if Kathleen Kennedy will give him the spin-off trilogy she promised him. My guess is that Kathleen Kennedy will want to get as far away from Rian Johnson as possible, as he is the only director she's gotten along with, really gotten along with. Like, she really went all in with him, and as I said, promised him that trilogy even before this film hit theaters. Although one has to wonder, was that a strategic move? Perhaps Kathleen Kennedy realized there might be problems with The Last Jedi and how it was perceived, and she was trying to head that off with a show of tremendous faith and strength with Rian Johnson. Oh, I love him. We love him here at Lucasfilm and Disney so much. We've given him a trilogy. That's how excited we are about this. But, strategic or not, it didn't work. And obviously, it was a very bad move because of the fact that so many fans are out for blood with Rian Johnson. And again, as I said, he's spectacularly cracking under pressure. I'd be like, hold the line, Johnson. Their whole career literally depends on this. But anyway, he's crumbling like nobody's business. And fans are calling for not only his resignation, but Kathleen Kennedy's as well. Now, things would have to get a heck of a lot worse, like way worse. And I know some of you are like, I don't even want to imagine what that would look like, but it would need to happen for Kathleen Kennedy to have any real concern about her career, right? But still, you don't want anyone calling for your resignation, right? So she's going to want to shut that down. And you'll notice that she stayed noticeably silent during all of this, so I think that means she's going to go with the old cut and run strategy rather than the hold your ground and fight one. So again, bottom line, this is about big versus strong box office numbers. And again, it's important to recognize the difference between the two. And if we're seeing a potential crack in a franchise that Disney needs to keep healthy and robust to prop up not only more movies, but merchandise, theme park lands, an immersive hotel experience that I'm so excited about, a streaming TV show, and anything else that they can think of. They just want to print Star Wars money over there. And the operative word there is print, as in it's a verb, and they want to keep doing it, right? This isn't a 1 or 2 or even 3 time thing. So will Disney repair this crack if they do feel that it exists? Or will they also, maybe they could want to do the cut and run strategy that Kathleen is implementing, right? Just like Warner Brothers did with the DCEU. But of course, that didn't work. And as we've seen time and time again, I want to stress that these cracks only get bigger. And the difference here, though, is that it's finally starting to happen with franchises that fans care about, which is making fans panic, that's making studios panic, it's compounding the problem, it's making it more toxic, it's just a real problem. I guess, this is what happens when you're forced to operate out in the open. But, I think the movie business has to be pretty transparent because we all do see the eventual end product anyway, right? And it's a creative process, et cetera, et cetera. So the question then becomes, how big does this crack need to get before Disney and hardcore pro Star Wars fans do acknowledge it? My guess would be Justice League sized. All right, so let's move on to some other box office news because there was a lot going on this weekend beyond Star Wars. Jumanji is a hit and a great example of smaller yet stronger box office numbers. Very strong here. This is climbed up to number 1 in its 3rd weekend. And the Jungle sequel has already passed 500 million worldwide. When did that happen? Isn't that exciting? And it proves that Hollywood and Dwayne Johnson can still revive a beloved brand. And speaking of Dwayne Johnson, Jumanji has surpassed San Andreas to become his biggest live-action non-Fast and Furious movie. And so we should be expecting a sequel to be announced very soon by Sony and Dwayne Johnson. This was an ensemble picture, very much so, by the way, and I hope that they realize that and they keep the whole cast going forward. And boy, Disney though, we got to go back to Disney for a second because they must be kicking themselves that this wasn't their Dwayne Johnson Jungle Cruise movie, right? And one has to wonder if the Mouse House will continue with that film, considering it will now seem like a Jumanji ripoff. I don't know I think the obvious move would be to just remove Dwayne Johnson from the project. Joan Colette Sarah, I believe, he was going to maybe do Suicide Squad 2. I think the Commuter is his, I believe, coming out this coming weekend. But I don't know if Dwayne Johnson would allow himself to be removed from maybe he'd have to if he's going to do a Jumanji sequel. But Dwayne Johnson, talk about, protecting your image and, how you're perceived by fans and the industry. I don't think he wants that headline of being taken off of the Jungle Cruise movie. So it'll probably just be put on the shelf for a real long time. All right, so then, as for Jason Blum, well, he's trying to jump, speaking of image, to more highbrow fare. His bread and butter remains cheap horror films, and he has another hit on his hands as Insidious 4 delivered the second biggest debut for the franchise and the 8th biggest ever for Blum himself. And good news for The Greatest Showman, which got a legit good headline this weekend: no spin required. Word of mouth does seem to be finally kicking in for this musical. I'm telling everyone I know to go see it, and it had the lowest drop in the top 10 and continues to be the #1 album on iTunes. Now, I still think that Fox will probably only see a small return on their investment theatrically, but like the album, I think the movie will do very well on iTunes down the line, especially if this keeps up in terms of word of mouth, and also The Greatest Showman continues to take home some gold for that soundtrack. As for the overall top 10, Molly's Game went semi-wide in its second weekend. It has about 1,500 theaters. That's semi-wide. If you want to be truly wide, you're closer to 3,000. So anyway, it went semi-wide, and it had a solid, if not winning, hand. It's way ahead of I, Tonya, though, although I, Tonya did take home some awards last night. Molly's Game did not. But I, Tonya is holding back until January, February. I don't know how long it can hold. But, they're already starting to have some qualifying figure skating championships. I was actually tuning into one the other day because there was nothing on during the holidays. And I was like, it's like I, Tonya. And actually, one ice skater did freak out with her scores. She got 4th place. She just missed the qualifying for the Olympics, so she has to be an alternate. And if that was some much needed and very, I'm sure, welcome surprise publicity for I, Tonya. They're also doing a Tonya Harding special on television, I believe, tonight on Dateline. And it's crazy, as I tweeted last night, and thanks to Vogue for picking up my tweet. It must be like taking crazy pills for Nancy Kerrigan to see Tonya Harding celebrated the way that Hollywood is currently doing so. But this is the narrative that Neon wants for I, Tonya, and they're going to slowly roll out that film all through January and February with boosts from awards like the Golden Globe win last night for Allison Janney, hopefully some Oscar noms, I think very likely some Oscar noms, and of course, again, the Winter Olympics that are coming up. Now, speaking of awards flicks, Phantom Thread added 2 more theaters this weekend, but remained surprisingly under the radar for a Paul Thomas Anderson, Daniel Day-Lewis movie. Although I think this is a fabulous development because, although I know some of you are rooting for the film, but I don't think Daniel Day-Lewis should go out like this, not only because I don't like the movie, but look at how it's being received, right? I mean, I don't believe he even showed up at the Golden Globes last night, even though he was nominated. So I think he should do one more. This is not the way his career should end. As for this coming weekend, it's a holiday here in the United States. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is on Monday, so the New Year's lull for movies is already over with 3 new releases hitting theaters, plus the post goes wide. And all 4 films are expected to bring in numbers that are in the same range. Plus, that's the same exact range that Jumanji, The Greatest Showman, if it continues to hold like this, and maybe even Star Wars The Last Jedi could also find themselves in, so it could be any movie's weekend. Which one are you planning to see? And that's this week's Movie Math. As always, thanks for going over the box office with me, and look forward to hearing your thoughts down below. And as always, you can check out some more videos right now.